So, J-Mart, tonight is J.D. Vance's night. Night 3 of the Republican National Convention there in Milwaukee. The headliner will be the new vice presidential candidate. Tell us a little bit about what we should expect to hear from him this evening as he introduces himself to the nation, but also, as we've been discussing, this is a full-on MAGA pick. No attempt here by Trump to try to rally together any other parts of the party. And it's seen as a real rebuke to some of the GOP establishment, particularly those on national security, particularly those who believe in defending Ukraine and alliances.
Yeah, I wrote my column this morning about just what an extraordinary pick this is when it comes to the already boiling national security debate within the Republican coalition. And, you know, a lot of people here want to be team players. The Mitch McConnells of the world are good party men. They're not going to disrupt things during the convention week. But privately, it's safe to say that the Reaganite wing of the party on national security is appalled. I mean, that J.D. Vance is a true blue isolationist and is going to be Trump's running mate and potentially could be in the White House for 12 years. And so, yeah, you pick this up. And what I'm already getting, guys, is early chatter about the cabinet, which to me says two things. Number one, it's concern about Vance and wanting to have a counter to Vance in the sit room. And number two, it's confidence that they're going to win in November. But you're already hearing talk about, okay, if we're going to have Vance as VP, well, if the Hawks need somebody at the table, we got to get Cotton and Pompeo into, state or defense so that we can actually counter Vance, because there is deep concern about what having Vance means and having him there in Trump's ear, and perhaps the last person who talks to Trump on issues like Ukraine.
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, what's so fascinating is, and let's just tick through these. If you talked about not just Reaganism, but the ethos of the Republican Party, even when I was there. And I will say there were some times where, as you remember, there's sometimes that some of us, when we were young, pushed back against the idea of just total free markets, 100% free markets. We didn't talk about, free trade. We talked about fair trade. And, bailing out other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that sort of conservative populism bill. But at the end of the day, it was about free markets. It was about immigration. It was Ronald Reagan's farewell speech. We have to be a country that continues to grow if we want to continue to thrive. And a strong national security posture where we ensure the spread of freedom across the globe. You have Donald Trump, who's supporting massive tariffs. The Wall Street Journal editorial page says the biggest tax increases out there right now that are being proposed on the middle class by Donald Trump. That's the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Then the idea of, again, completely shut down immigration, legal immigration, dreamers, et cetera, et cetera. Again, very anti-Reagan and very Republican establishment move, at least from the past. And then a return to 1930s isolationism. Sorry to take so long, but these are, as Claire said, that wasn't hyperbole. You take the three legs of Reaganism, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have broken all three.
And, Joe, I'd actually add a fourth thing, which is cultural conservatism. The party was defined, especially on issues like abortion rights, as very much a traditional conservative party. And obviously, Donald Trump has no interest in cultural traditionalism for reasons that we can talk about at great length here. And so if you add that, too, it's a real departure from what defined the party for really the last generation or so. And I think the pick of Vance emphatically cements that departure from the GOP being a Reaganite party to really being a sort of European-style populist nationalist party, anti-immigration, much more isolationist, inward-looking, not really engaged on cultural issues as traditionally defined. And yes, happy to engage in a massive tariff regime to protect the country itself instead of expanding markets and trade. It is a vast difference from the party that you served in and you came up in.
Yeah, and Willie, what we're underlining here is not shock in Donald Trump's positions, because these are the positions that helped him get the nomination in 16, 20, and again in 24. It's the pick of J.D. Vance. It's a double down on all of that instead of, a lot of these country club types that you, Meacham, and me talk about. Their hero is Peter Millar, vest-wearing Virginia governor Glenn Youngkin. Somebody like Youngkin or somebody like Nikki Haley that would have, again, not an easy pick for Donald Trump, but not somebody he may have been comfortable with, but somebody, again, that would have expanded the party a bit and made some of these people that are so repulsed by the thought of voting for this ticket would draw them in. Donald Trump, really, he just, again, as J. Mart said, he said, nope, we're going to go full MAGA, and this is not going to look like Ronald Reagan's party. This is Donald Trump's party, and this looks more like right-wing nationalist parties in Europe.
Yeah, it's a legacy pick by Donald Trump to keep the MAGA movement going for generations. He'll be 40 years old. Senator Vance will be next month. He's young by political standards. He's young, and he's a guy who even yesterday Donald Trump Jr. said he should run in 2028. They're already thinking that way. But I guess, Claire, allowing, after it took some time to get there, allowing Nikki Haley to speak last night. She was not originally scheduled to be there. In the last few days, she was added. I guess is Donald Trump perhaps begrudgingly saying, okay, I'll bring Nikki Haley into the fold if she, in fact, can compel some of the undecided swing voters in these communities that are going to decide the election. They appear to like her because they continue to vote for her in primaries against me long after she got out of the race. Let's bring her on board. We don't have to be best buddies, but maybe she gets enough votes to help me win.
Yeah, I don't think that the people that were voting for Nikki Haley in those primaries were voting for her as much as they were voting against Trump. Yeah. I think there is a segment of the Republican Party that still longs for the old Republican Party that rejects Donald Trump because of his nonsense, because of the chaos, because of the incredibly ugly, ego, narcissistic personality that he displays every day. So I'm not sure that happens, but I think the calculation, first of all, I don't think Donald Trump may give a soft and sweet speech Thursday night, who knows? But that's not who Donald Trump is. That's not how he got there. That's not how he's going to get back there. He believes that he is going to get back to the White House through one thing, and that is enthusiasm of his base. And he believes that J.D. Vance does more to help that, especially at the edges of young people and maybe some people of color that J.D. Vance is going to go after in a way that is all about economic populism. I mean, the Teamsters president was in front of the Republican convention this week. Can you imagine that happening under Ronald Reagan? I don't think so. I don't think a union president would have been at a Ronald Reagan nominating convention. So and this is really now about the enthusiasm of these two parties for their candidate and the fear, I think, that both parties may have of what the other party represents. And I believe that Democrats have a much stronger case to make on being fearful of a second Trump term than the Trump folks have to be making about Joe Biden.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.